The headlines have already moved on. Maduro's in New York and the airstrikes are a thing of the past. The press releases are out, the official lines have been delivered. But the real story, the one that matters, it's just getting started. And what went down in Venezuela wasn't about the law. This is a story about power, about how the machinery of the world actually operates. We're cutting through the noise, ignoring the drama, to show you what was truly at stake. Forget about presidents and political parties for a second. This is about the architecture of power itself. We're going to connect the dots and show you how a mission disguised as a simple police action was actually a critical move in a global chess game over natural resources, vital shipping lanes, and the very financial architecture that determines who rules the world. For years, the screws were tightening in the shadows. Sanctions became a stranglehold. Access to the global banking system was choked off. Meanwhile, the global energy map was being redrawn, and China was quietly expanding its economic footprint all over South America. So no, Venezuela didn't just pop up on the radar overnight. It reached a boiling point where it could no longer be ignored. What you saw on the news looked like a sudden explosion, but it was really the final domino to fall in a long calculated sequence where diplomacy was replaced by force and cold hard economics won out over negotiation. In this analysis, we're asking the most important question. Why now? Why did this all go down at this exact moment? We'll show you why oil prices, the global financial system, and China's influence in the region are the real heart of the matter, no matter how many times the official story changes, and we'll reveal why what they aren't saying is far more important than what they are. Flick on any news channel right now and you're being fed the exact same loop over and over again. You've got commandos rappelling from helicopters, a South American head of state in handcuffs, and a parade of pundits all talking about a clean surgical strike. They want you focused on the spectacle, on the high-tech military victory. It's a magic trick, because while you're looking at the helicopters, you're not looking at the balances sheets. Let's be clear, this was never about exporting democracy. It wasn't about human rights violations, and it wasn't about dismantling drug cartels. This was a debt collection executed with military force, and it exposes a fundamental truth about global power that everybody pretends isn't real. You can't sanction the countries that have a chokehold on your most critical resources, at least not forever. And certainly not without consequences. For 23 years, the United States tried to defy that law of political gravity. They slapped sanctions on Venezuela. They froze their assets. They propped up puppet governments. They funneled cash to opposition movements. They tried literally everything short of what you just saw happen, until this week, when the entire strategy spectacularly imploded. On December the 28th, Nicolas Maduro inked energy contracts with China to the tune of $18 billion. Just 2 days after that, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan quietly requested a sit-down with Venezuelan officials in Panama. And the agenda wasn't to issue threats or make demands. It was to negotiate access to the very oil Washington had spent 2 decades trying to keep off the market. What you witnessed wasn't diplomacy, it was a surrender. A surrender that was interrupted by warplanes. For years, the mainstream narrative has been selling you a story. They told you the shale boom meant American energy independence. They said that since the US is now the planet's top oil producer, it could wash its hands of the Middle East and Latin America for good. Now there's a kernel of truth to that, but in the world of geopolitics, a half-truth is a total lie. Yes, the United States pumps a staggering amount of oil out of the ground, but it's almost all light, sweet crude. Think of it like a fine wine. It's light, it's high quality, it's expensive to produce, and it's not what America's refineries were built to drink. And that's the whole problem. See the massive refineries along the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana. The very backbone of America's energy infrastructure were built 50 years ago. And they were engineered specifically for some heavy, sour crude, that thick and sludgy stuff that comes out of places like Venezuela and the Middle East. So America produces the champagne of oil, but its industrial engine runs on diesel. For decades, the solution was simple: import the heavy stuff from Saudi Arabia. But that relationship is effectively dead. Saudi Arabia is done being the gas station for the West. Riyadh is cutting production to jack up prices. They're cozying up to BRICS, and they're ghosting Washington's phone calls. The Saudi Crown Prince has sent an unmistakable message he's finished playing the role of a client state. This left the United States with a serious supply problem. They were facing a shortage of the specific grade of oil needed to keep their own refineries from grinding to a halt. What's worse, they had already burned through their insurance policy. Over the past 2 years, the administration drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That reserve is supposed to be for a major war or a national catastrophe. It's not a political slush fund to artificially lower gas prices before an election, but that's exactly how they used it. They flooded the market with millions of barrels to keep a lid on prices, And now the bill has come due. The SPR is at its lowest level since 1983. 351 million barrels. That's all that's left in the tank. Under the Biden administration, 180 million barrels were released in 2022 alone, just to manipulate prices after the war in Ukraine kicked off. And that oil has never been replaced. And the International Energy Agency is now forecasting a global shortfall of 1. We could be looking at a 2 million barrel a day shortfall by 2025, especially if the situation with Iran blows up and Russian sanctions hold firm. So the folks in Washington started poring over maps, desperate to find new sources of heavy crude. What about Canada? They're already pumping at 100%, and Russia, well, they're sanctioned and definitely not playing nice. Saudi Arabia is giving Washington the cold shoulder, cozying up to Beijing instead. That left only one viable option on the table, the absolutely massive reserves of heavy crude in the Orinoco Belt, and that means Venezuela. But here's the secret, this whole game isn't really about the supply of oil, it's about who gets to set the price. Look, Venezuela is sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. We're talking something like 300 billion barrels. The problem is, their ability to get it out of the ground has completely collapsed. Under Maduro's leadership, production plummeted from over 3 million barrels a day to under 1 million. Their equipment is falling into ruin and foreign investment has vanished. All the skilled engineers and workers have fled the country. So you have to ask if Venezuela isn't even producing that much oil right now. Why is it suddenly the center of this huge strategic play? Because the real fight isn't about today's output, it's about who dictates the future. For the last 50 years, there's been one unbreakable rule: oil is bought and sold in US dollars. This system, known as the Petrodollar, generates a constant artificial demand for American currency. Think about it, any nation on Earth that needs to import oil first has to get their hands on US dollars to pay for it. This demand is what lets the United States borrow cheaply, print money without immediate hyperinflation, and finance its massive debt at interest rates that defy all economic logic. But that entire system is now starting to fracture. Saudi Arabia just let its exclusive dollar-only deal expire and chose not to renew it. The BRICS countries, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, are increasingly ditching the dollar and settling their energy deals using their own currencies or the yuan. And here's the kicker. Multiple reports suggested Venezuela was on the verge of linking its entire oil sector to China's international payment system. The plan was to start pricing its crude in a basket of currencies with the yuan playing the lead role. Now, if they had actually pulled that off, China would have been able to buy all the Venezuelan oil it wanted without needing to hold a single US dollar. And if China no longer needs to stockpile dollars, global demand for our currency plummets. When demand goes down, the value of the dollar goes down with it. And if the dollar weakens, the cost for America to service its own national debt goes through the roof. That is the existential threat. The real danger was never about Venezuela selling 1 million barrels to China. It was about Venezuela with its 300 billion barrels of reserves proving to the world that you can successfully de-link from the dollar system and survive. That was the one outcome Washington could never allow. See, the US dollar isn't backed by gold anymore. That ended back in 1971, and it's not backed by industrial might either. Our manufacturing base was hollowed out decades ago. It's backed by just one thing. A handshake deal made with the Saudis 50 years ago which declared that all oil had to be traded in dollars. This is the secret sauce. Because every single country needs oil, it means every single country needs dollars to buy it. This creates a permanent artificial demand for US currency. It's what allows America to print trillions, effectively exporting its inflation to the rest of the world without ever facing the music at home. There's a name for this arrangement, the exorbitant privilege. It has been the bedrock of American prosperity for half a century. But recently that magic has started to fade. In June of 2024, that foundational petrodollar agreement with Saudi Arabia officially expired. The Saudis simply let it lapse. Now they are accepting Chinese yuan for oil shipments to China, which is their #1 customer. Then in November of 2024, the United Arab Emirates conducted $128 billion in direct trade with China using only the yuan. Russia is now selling its oil to India for rupees and rubles. Iran is selling to China for yuan. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has cratered, falling from 71% in 1999 to just 58% in 2024. Every single percentage point drop represents about $350 billion in lost demand for US Treasury bonds. And this is the part of the story the mainstream news isn't telling you. This situation with Venezuela isn't happening in a vacuum. It's just one move on a much larger chessboard, an economic war for a continent that has been escalating for 20 years. In 2024, trade between China and Latin America hit $518 billion. No, that is not a typo. That's over $500 billion, and it is growing at a staggering 30% per year. Just 2 decades ago, China accounted for less than 2% of Latin America's total exports. Fast forward to today, and China is now South America's single largest trading partner. Brazil's trade with China now dwarfs its trade with the United States. The same is true for Peru and for Chile. Ecuador inked a free trade agreement with Beijing in 2024, and Nicaragua followed suit. A stunning 22 out of 33 nations in Latin America and the Caribbean have officially joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. And we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet, we're talking about concrete and steel. China now either owns or operates critical port facilities in Peru, Brazil, Panama, and Ecuador. The brand new port of Chancay in Peru, for example, was specifically designed to funnel exports from 6 different South American countries directly to Asia, completely bypassing the United States. So when you see headlines about Venezuela, you need to understand the much larger context. The United States is witnessing what was once its undisputed backyard pivot economically towards Beijing's orbit. And this isn't some abstract shift. It's being built with ports, railways, energy deals, and brand new financial networks. Right now, Venezuela is producing about 780,000 barrels a day. But with Chinese technical expertise and Russian financial backing, that number could easily jump to 1.4 million barrels a day in as little as 18 months. But that brings us to the core problem that triggered this entire operation. Every single drop of that new oil is already claimed. Between 2007 and 2024, China locked in $62 billion worth of oil for loan deals with Venezuela. Russia poured another $17 billion in it with a guarantee of getting paid back in crude oil. Washington tried 4 different plays to shatter this deadlock, and every single one of them was a complete failure. Plan A was to squeeze them hard with sanctions. But that strategy was dead on arrival. Why? Because Venezuela had already built a shadow export network that completely bypassed the SWIFT banking system. They were using ghost fleets sailing under foreign flags, taking payments in Chinese yuan and running their crude through processing plants in places like Malaysia. The White House quickly learned a hard lesson. You can sanction the paperwork, but you can't stop the oil from flowing. So they moved on to Plan B, engineering a regime change using local allies. They sank millions into propping up Juan Guaido, publicly anointing him as the legitimate president, despite the fact he couldn't command a single barracks. By 2023, his own opposition movement had thrown in the towel. America's chosen guy became an international punchline. Next up, Plan C, diplomatic isolation. That blew up in their face too, because 134 other nations refused to recognize Guaido. In fact, key players in Latin America, we're talking Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, all restored full diplomatic ties with Caracas between 2022 and 2024, basically telling Washington to get lost. Alright, that brings us to the 4th and final attempt, restricted permits. This involved giving companies like Chevron a very tight leash to operate in Venezuela, but only under a mountain of conditions. And that's fading as we speak, because Maduro had learnt the cardinal rule of dealing with Washington: never trust an offer that's designed to put you in a cage. And that's when the event happened that pushed everything over the edge. See, there were intel reports, the kind the mainstream media loves to ignore, saying that Caracas was about to deploy what financial insiders were calling the nuclear option. Venezuela was on the verge of officially plugging its entire energy sector into China's cross-border interbank payment system. They were preparing to value their entire oil reserve, the largest on the planet, not in US dollars, but in a basket of currencies spearheaded by the UN and backed by physical gold. Had they pulled this off, it would have been a signal flare to every single emerging economy on the globe. It would have proven that a nation could leverage its vast natural resources, completely sidestep the American financial system, and thrive. To Washington, this wasn't just a challenge. It was an existential threat. So the White House was at a crossroads. They could either accept this new multipolar world and negotiate as an equal, or they could play the one card they had left in abundance: raw military force. They chose force. Now, from a purely tactical standpoint, the operation was stunning. Delta Force operators snatched Maduro right from his residence, 0 American casualties. Maduro is currently on a US naval vessel en route to New York to stand trial on a sealed indictment that's been on ice since 2020. At the press conference, Trump couldn't contain himself. He said, and I quote, "You're probably never going to get to see what I saw last night. It was amazing. These guys were moving so fast." He was watching the whole thing unfold live from Mar-a-Lago, as if it were a primetime reality show, which in his mind it absolutely was. But this is where the made-for-TV special ends and the brutal reality begins. At that presser, both Trump and Marco Rubio got hit with the same questions over and over. So who's in charge of Venezuela now? How long are US troops staying? What's the actual game plan for governing the country? And all they had were blank stares. Trump did let one thing slip through, that American oil corporations would be going in to help Venezuela sort out its energy sector. He was incredibly blunt about it. He mentioned how tragic it was that they were producing so little, considering their massive reserves, and that US companies were going to fix that problem. He even said the oil would be shipped to other nations and to the United States as repayment for damages. The next day, Rubio went into damage control mode. He claimed the US doesn't need Venezuelan crude, stating this is about leadership, not resources. But that contrast says it all, doesn't it? Trump reveals the true motive behind the operation while Rubio cleans it up for the cameras. But here's the thing, Venezuela is not Panama. This isn't 1989 when George H.W. Bush sent in the military to grab General Noriega. Panama was a country of 3 million people. Venezuela has a population of 30 million. Panama hosted a massive US military base right next to the strategically vital Panama Canal. Venezuela has neither of those things. And even more critical is the fact that Maduro wasn't some lone dictator. This wasn't like taking out a Saddam Hussein or a Gaddafi, where the entire power structure revolved around a single individual. Maduro rose through the ranks of a deeply entrenched system, the Chavista machine. It's a complex network of generals, intel chiefs, judges, and armed civilian militias known as colectivos, who control everything from the shipping ports to the food distribution. You take out Maduro, but the defense minister is still in place. The Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, arguably one of the most powerful figures in the entire regime, he's still there. The Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, still there. Every single one of these individuals has their own piece of the economic pie. You have to understand, Venezuela has more generals per soldier than in any other country on the planet. We're talking something like 20 times the ratio you'd see in a typical military. And every one of those generals runs a personal fiefdom. They've got control of mining concessions, they run the ports, they manage the oil shipments. The military in Venezuela doesn't just defend the country, the military is the country's economy. And this is precisely where a tactically brilliant operation turns into an absolute strategic nightmare. Because you can bet the rest of the world is watching this very closely. Every emerging nation on Earth, from Nigeria to Brazil to Indonesia, is looking at what just happened in Venezuela and drawing the exact same conclusion. So what happens if we decide to stop selling them our resources in their dollars? Will we be next on their list? That kind of threat doesn't create allies, it creates enemies in waiting. Back at the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia in October of 2024, Vladimir Putin unveiled something called BRICS, a payment system built on the blockchain that cuts the US dollar out of the picture entirely. And this isn't just talk, Brazil is already using it for pilot programs in its agricultural trade. South Africa just settled its first diamond transaction with it this past November. Meanwhile, Iran and Russia are using it to finalize weapons deals under the radar. Now Venezuela has formally requested to join the club. If they get the green light, and believe me they will, their 303.8 billion barrels of oil reserves will plug directly into a financial network completely walled off from Washington's influence. The flip has already been switched. Most of the world just hasn't realized it yet. China's official gold holdings jumped by 225 tons in 2023 alone. The actual amount they bought is likely twice that figure, funneled quietly through Hong Kong imports that don't get fully reported. Russia was booted from the SWIFT system back in 2022. Their response, they built their very own financial messaging network. It's already handling 30% of Russia's internal payments and has expanded to 159 financial institutions across 20 different nations. China launched its version TEPS way back in 2015. As of early 2025, it now connects 1,423 financial groups across 109 countries. It's processing $436 billion in daily transactions, all of it completely outside the dollar-based financial world. The expansion of BRICS in 2023 welcomed Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt and Ethiopia into the fold. That brings the bloc's total to 45% of the world's population, 36% of the global economy, and get this, control of 72% of the planet's confirmed oil reserves. By making a move on Venezuela to seize its oil, Fields the United States has just proven exactly why this alternative system is so necessary for the rest of the world. They've just validated every single speech Putin and Xi Jinping have ever given about America's reckless unilateralism and aggression. Before this mess, countries played the dollar game because it was simple, stable, and the infrastructure was already in place. After this, nations will be scrambling to dump the dollar because holding US assets now officially makes you a target. It means your independence is conditional on their approval. The petrodollar is no longer a business arrangement. It's a hostage situation. Trump believes he's projecting power. He believes he's sending a message that America is back, that we can use force anywhere we please and don't have to answer to anyone. But what he's actually showing the world is desperation. A truly dominant nation doesn't need to seize resources through force. It has the best trade deals, the superior technology, the most trusted currency. People line up to do business with you because it makes them stronger. When you have to resort to military force to get oil, when you have to strong-arm neighbouring countries, when you have to toss the rulebook and govern by pure intimidation, that's not strength. That's how a declining empire behaves when it knows it can't compete honestly anymore. And the entire world is watching. China sees it, Russia sees it, India sees it, Brazil sees it, even our so-called friends like France and Germany see it. Even if they aren't saying it publicly yet, the Venezuela gambit has backfired spectacularly. It was meant to guarantee American oil supplies sites and tighten the dollar's grip on the world. Instead, it has slammed the accelerator on the global exodus from the dollar and exposed the reality that American power, while militarily immense, is economically fragile. You can win every single battle and still lose the war. There are 3 ways this can unfold from here, and none of them are clean. Path 1 is a managed transition. The US manages to broker a fragile peace between the government remnants and the opposition. A caretaker leadership is installed. Oil contracts get renegotiated. The flow of money is restructured. This is the best-case fantasy scenario. It would require incredible cooperation from warring factions and would take years to build anything stable. Path 2 is fragmentation. The state collapses. Regional warlords carve out their own territories. Some areas are run by military factions loyal to the old regime. Others are controlled by opposition militias, and many more by criminal syndicates that rush into the power vacuum. Oil production remains chaotic. Foreign investment dries up completely. The humanitarian crisis explodes. This is the Iraq and Libya playbook all over again. Path 3 is economic proxy war. China refuses to accept the new reality. Beijing continues to buy oil using a ghost fleet of untraceable tankers. It funnels financial support to resistance cells. It uses its leverage in other Latin American nations to undermine US-backed institutions, turning Venezuela into a long, bleeding economic wound. This is the great power competition model. None of these outcomes are swift or easy, and the Trump administration has offered zero clarity on which one they're pursuing or how they plan to manage the inevitable chaos. The markets are betting on the fairy tale ending that Venezuelan oil will soon be flowing freely again, priced in good old American dollars and heading to US refineries and our allies. But history tells a very different story. Iraq was supposed to be quick, Libya was supposed to stabilize, Afghanistan was supposed to be a seamless handover to a new government. Demolishing governments is easy. Building functional states out of the wreckage is nearly impossible. And the one question nobody in Washington dares to ask is, what is our plan for when this fails? What happens when Venezuela shatters into a million pieces? What if the oil fields can't get back up and running? What happens if China doubles down on forging alternate supply routes, and what if the rest of Latin America decides that partnering with the United States is just too big of a risk? The answers to those questions are what will ultimately determine if this whole operation was a stroke of genius or a catastrophic mistake. And look, at this point, it's way too soon to call it. But here's what we do know. The battle for economic dominance in South America has officially stepped out of the shadows. It's happening right here, right now, for everyone to see. And the prize in this fight, it's all about oil, the dollar, and global influence. The planes are already gone from Caracas. Maduro's been put on a naval vessel and he's en route to New York. Give it a few days and the media will have already moved on to the next big story. Who knows what it'll be? Greenland, Canada, maybe. Maybe some wild 3 a.m. post from a world leader. But the real fallout from this, that's not going away. Think about the trust that was the bedrock of the global order for 80 years. This idea that there were rules to the game, that borders meant something that you only sent in the military as a final resort, not your opening play. Well, that's shattered now, and you can't just glue it back together with a press conference. Every other nation on the planet was watching, and they won't forget what they saw. They've learned the lesson. When a country with a lot of oil steps out of line and tries to bypass the dollar, American operators show up in the dead of night. And you better believe they're going to act on that knowledge. The era of the petrodollar is coming to a close, but not for any of the reasons the so-called experts are talking about. It's not about inflation or crypto or any of that noise. It's ending because the United States just pulled back the curtain and revealed that the whole system isn't about mutual advantage anymore. It's about raw power. And in the long run, ruling by fear is always more expensive than leading through cooperation. The world is realigning right before our eyes. Entirely new frameworks are being built as we speak. Fresh alliances are being forged, alternative currencies are emerging, and the one nation that had the chance to steer this transition to mould it in a way that would preserve its own dominance and prosperity has instead decided to go to war with the future itself. And that's the real tragedy in all of this. It's not that things are changing, change was always inevitable. The tragedy is that this transition is now going to be far more painful for everyone involved than it ever needed to be. The operation itself was just the opening act. The main event is what comes next. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the fallout is going to be a mess far bigger than the people in charge are prepared to handle.